It is the largest island on Earth, a realm of ice and silence, so vast it seems to defy human scale. This is Greenland. For most of history, it has been a place on the periphery of global consciousness, a silent giant slumbering at the top of the world. But for a few critical decades, this immense landscape was anything but silent. It was a frontline, a stage for geopolitical chess, a fortress of immense strategic value, and the site of some of the most ambitious and secret military projects ever conceived. The United States of America built dozens of bases here, carving out a military empire on the ice. And then they left. The retreat from the ice was as swift as the buildup was determined. A great exodus that left behind ghost towns, forgotten runways, and a toxic legacy buried beneath the snow. Why pour billions of dollars and immense human effort into conquering this unforgiving environment, only to abandon it? This is not a simple story of retreat. It is a story of shifting threats, of technological revolutions, of overwhelming costs, and of secrets so dangerous they could have triggered the end of the world. This is the story of why the United States abandoned its fortresses in Greenland and the ghosts they left behind. The story begins not with the Cold War, but with the inferno of World War II. In the spring of 1940, Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, the colonial power in Greenland. Suddenly, the vast island was adrift, vulnerable, and of immense strategic importance to the Allied forces. The interest of the United States was not just abstract. It was intensely practical, driven by three critical needs. The first was geological. Near the southern tip of Greenland lay the Ivigtut mine. This single, unassuming pit held the entire global supply of natural cryolite. Cryolite was an essential catalyst for the production of aluminum, the metal that gave wings to the Allied war effort. Without it, the fleets of bombers and fighters that darkened the skies over Europe could not have been built on such a massive scale. The mine itself was perilously vulnerable, an open pit extending below sea level, protected from the ocean by only a thin wall of rock. Protecting this single resource was a matter of extreme urgency. The second need was geographical. In an age before non-stop transatlantic flight was common, the location of Greenland made it an indispensable stepping stone. It was a vital link in the North Atlantic air ferry route, a bridge for steel and men. Bases like Bluie West One, later known as Narsarsuaq Air Base, were carved out of the wilderness with incredible speed. Construction began by the United States Army in June 1941, even before the official entry of the United States into the war. By January 1942, the first aircraft had landed. At its peak, this single base housed 4,000 American servicemen. An estimated 10,000 aircraft would touch down here, refueling on their way to the war zones in Europe and North Africa. A second base, Bluie West 8, or Sandreström Air Base, was established in October 1941 to bolster this critical air bridge. The third need was atmospheric. Meteorologists had discovered a fundamental truth of weather forecasting. The patterns that formed over Greenland would, days later, dictate the weather over Western Europe. This information was not academic, it was a weapon. Accurate forecasts were critical for planning any major aerial or marine operation, from bombing raids to naval invasions. Both Allied and Nazi forces knew this, leading to a clandestine and high-stakes war for control of weather stations on the remote eastern coast. For these reasons, a single mineral, a vital flight path, and the secrets of the weather, Greenland was transformed from a remote curiosity into an essential component of the Allied war machine. The United States, through a treaty with the defected Danish ambassador in Washington, established a military footprint that would lay the foundation for a far larger and far more dangerous presence to come. As the embers of World War II cooled, a new, more terrifying conflict began to freeze the globe, the Cold War. The adversary was now the Soviet Union, and the threat was nuclear annihilation. The shortest path for a Soviet bomber attack on North America was not across the Atlantic, but over the Arctic. Suddenly, Greenland was no longer a stepping stone, it was the front door. The response from the United States was monumental. It began with the construction of Thule Air Base in 1951. The project, codenamed Blue Jay, was an extraordinary logistical feat executed in total secrecy. An armada of 120 shipments, carrying 12,000 men and 300,000 tons of cargo, descended on the desolate northern coast. In a breathtaking race against the brutal Arctic winter, the bulk of the airfield and base was constructed in a mere 60 days. At its peak, Thule housed approximately 10,000 personnel. Its purpose was clear and terrifying: to serve as a primary frontline defense against the USSR. It was a home for interceptor jets designed to shoot down Soviet bombers and a refueling point for the long-range bombers of the United States, which might be directed at the Soviet Union in a retaliatory strike. The sheer speed and scale of the construction of Thule showed the overwhelming sense of imminent threat that defined the era. Thule was the anchor of an even larger project, the Distant Early Warning Line, or DW Line. This was a thin, electronic tripwire stretched across the roof of the world, a chain of radar stations designed for a single purpose: to detect incoming Soviet bombers and provide the precious minutes of warning needed to launch a defense. Bases in Greenland, like Sandreström, evolved from their World War II role to become critical supply stations for these remote, isolated DW Line outposts. This vast, frozen fortress was a fixed defense against a very specific kind of threat: armadas of Russian bombers carrying nuclear gravity bombs. But in the relentless technological arms race of the Cold War, threats do not remain static for long. While the DW Line looked to the skies, the most audacious American project in Greenland looked down into the ice itself. Publicly, it was known as Camp Century, the city under the ice. Built in 1959 by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, it was presented to the world as a marvel of Arctic engineering, a demonstration of how to build affordable military outposts and a base for scientific research on the ice cap. It was powered by a portable nuclear reactor, a remarkable achievement for the time. But the public story was a cover. The true purpose of Camp Century was a top-secret plan of breathtaking ambition and recklessness: Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm envisioned a hidden, underground network of tunnels stretching for 4,000 kilometers beneath the Greenland ice sheet. This subterranean fortress was designed to hide and deploy up to 600 nuclear missiles. From these secret launch sites, the missiles could reach the heart of the Soviet Union in the event of a nuclear war. It was a plan to turn the entire ice cap into a massive, undetectable missile silo. But the engineers and military planners made one fundamental, fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the ice itself. The ice sheet was not the stable, static platform they had believed it to be. The glacier was moving, flowing toward the sea at a rate far faster than anticipated. The meticulously engineered tunnels began to deform and compress. The base, which had a projected lifespan of 10 years, was becoming structurally unsound after only a few. The entire concept of a stable missile base was rendered impossible. The project was aborted. In 1967, after just 8 years of operation, Camp Century was abandoned. The nuclear reactor was removed, but everything else, the buildings, the tunnels, an estimated 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, radioactive coolant, toxic chemicals, and 24 million liters of untreated sewage, was left behind, abandoned to the ice, presumed to be forever entombed in a frozen grave. Project Iceworm was not defeated by the Soviets, but by the raw, relentless power of the Greenland environment. If Camp Century was a story of hubris, what happened the following year was a story of near catastrophe. On January 21, 1968, a United States Air Force B-52 bomber was flying near Thule Air Base. It was part of Operation Chrome Dome, a program that kept nuclear-armed bombers in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A fire broke out in the cabin. The crew ejected, and the massive aircraft, carrying 4 B-28 Fi thermonuclear bombs, slammed into the sea ice just kilometers south of the base. There was no nuclear explosion, but the conventional explosives on board detonated on impact, rupturing the nuclear payloads. An estimated 10 trillion becquerels of radioactive plutonium, along with uranium, americium, and tritium, were scattered across the ice and sea. It was a broken arrow incident, the military term for a major accident involving a nuclear weapon. The cleanup, code-named Project Crested Ice, was frantic. But it was impossible to recover everything. A significant amount of plutonium remained, contaminating the ice, the water, and the ocean sediment. For the indigenous Inuit people, whose diet relies on fish and sea mammals from the region, it created a lasting health risk. The crash had even more terrifying implications. The base at Thule was a primary target for a Soviet attack. The loss of both the aircraft and the base in a single incident could have been misinterpreted by the North American Aerospace Defense Command. It could have been seen as the first strike in a nuclear war, potentially leading to a recommendation for a full-scale retaliation. World War III was a terrifyingly real possibility. The incident also created a massive diplomatic crisis. Greenland is a territory of Denmark, a country with a declared nuclear weapons-free policy. The crash exposed the secret overflights of nuclear weapons, a direct contradiction of this policy. The government in Denmark protested strongly. The crash was a pivotal moment, a stark and radioactive warning of the extreme risks of the Cold War military posture in the Arctic. The Chrome Dome operations were immediately discontinued. The age of absolute confidence was over. The abandonment of the bases in Greenland was not a single event, but a slow unraveling, driven by four powerful forces that rendered the vast Arctic fortress obsolete. The first force was technological evolution. The very reason for bases like Bluie West One was the limited range of World War II aircraft. The development of aerial refueling technology made these stepping-stone bases far less critical. Long-range aircraft could now cross the Atlantic without stopping, severing a key strategic purpose for the bases. Bluie West One was handed over to the Danish government in 1958, a victim of its own technological succession. More profoundly, the primary threat itself changed. The DW line was built to detect slow-moving bombers. But the Soviet Union soon fielded intercontinental ballistic missiles and sea-launched ballistic missiles. These weapons traveled through space at incredible speeds. The ground-based radar of the DW line was like a fence built to stop cavalry in an age of aircraft. It was largely ineffective against the new missile threat. Defense strategy had to pivot. The new front line was not in the atmosphere, but in space. Satellite early warning systems became the most reliable way to detect a missile launch anywhere on the planet. While radar at Thule was modernized to track ballistic missiles, the sprawling, expensive DW line was now a relic. Its official closing ceremony was held in 1993. The bases were not abandoned because of a failure of will, but because of a success of innovation that made them redundant. The second force was geopolitical realignment. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 fundamentally redrew the map of the world. The primary adversary, the very reason for the massive military buildup, ceased to exist. The existential threat from the north, which had justified decades of immense expenditure, evaporated. Thule Air Base, which had supplied the DW line stations, was closed in 1992. The strategic rationale for these costly Arctic outposts had vanished. The third force was the brutal reality of the environment itself. Operating in the Arctic imposed a constant, severe tax on every aspect of military life. The extreme cold could solidify aviation fuel and make metal brittle. Batteries died quickly. The risk of frostbite was constant, capable of incapacitating a person in under 15 minutes. Every piece of equipment, every human action, was more difficult and vastly more expensive. Maintaining this network of bases was an immense logistical and economic burden. When the Cold War ended, the cost-benefit analysis shifted dramatically. The expense could no longer be justified. The final force was the rise of sovereignty. The relationship between the United States, Denmark, and Greenland was changing. The 1968 B-52 crash had already created deep diplomatic friction over the nuclear policy of Denmark. As Greenland gained increasing autonomy from Denmark, developing its own parliament and legal system, a new voice emerged in the equation. The leadership of Greenland expressed a clear preference for partnership over military occupation. There were growing local concerns about the environmental impact of the bases and a desire to protect the unique cultural identity of the Greenlandic people. The era of unilateral military decisions was coming to an end. Technology, politics, economics, and the environment all conspired to make the great American fortress on the ice unsustainable. The retreat was now inevitable. The withdrawal left more than just memories and empty buildings. It left a toxic footprint. The abandonment of many sites was an act of dereliction, leaving behind a staggering amount of waste that now poses a direct threat to one of the most fragile ecosystems on the planet. The local Inuit people have a poignant name for the fields of rusting barrels left behind. They call them American flowers, a stark, poetic term for the industrial decay blooming in their backyard. At the site of the abandoned Bluie East 2, an estimated 10,000 leaking fuel barrels litter the landscape, alongside dilapidated vehicles and structures filled with asbestos. Other estimates suggest the total number of drums could be as high as 200,000. But the greatest environmental threat lies buried deep within the ice. Camp Century, the abandoned city, is a ticking time bomb. It contains an estimated 9,000 tons of material. This includes the remnants of buildings, diesel fuel, and toxic polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. It also contains the radioactive coolant from the nuclear reactor and millions of liters of human waste. For decades, this toxic legacy was out of sight and out of mind, locked away in the ice. But now, the lock is breaking. Climate change is warming the Arctic faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Scientists now fear that as the ice cap melts, the waste from Camp Century and other sites, once thought to be permanently entombed, could be released. Climate models project that the waste at Camp Century could be exposed to the environment as early as the year 2090. A legacy of the Cold War could become a full-blown environmental catastrophe of the 21st century. This has created a complex and contentious dispute. Greenland has demanded that Denmark, as the former colonial power, take full responsibility for the cleanup. Copenhagen eventually agreed, earmarking approximately $29 million in 2018 to begin remediation at some 30 sites. But this agreement is limited. It explicitly does not cover the most hazardous sites, like the radioactive contamination at Thule or the buried toxic dump at Camp Century. The full costs are unknown, but they are astronomical, and the responsibility for paying them remains a source of deep tension. The story of the American presence in Greenland has come full circle. The same climate change that threatens to unearth the toxic legacy of the past is also making the island strategically vital once again. Melting sea ice is opening new, shorter shipping lanes between Asia, Europe, and North America. The retreating glaciers may also be revealing vast, untapped deposits of minerals, oil, and gas. The strategic interest of the United States has been rekindled. The base at Thule, now renamed Patuxent Space Base, remains a critical asset for space monitoring and missile early warning. Yet this renewed focus from global powers is met with apprehension by many Greenlanders. They fear their home becoming a pawn in a new great game, and they are acutely aware of the unresolved damage from the last one. The retreat from the ice was never a clean departure. It was a complex unraveling, a story written by technology, geopolitics, and the unyielding power of the natural world. It serves as a stark lesson in the long-term consequences of military action, a reminder that footprints left in the most remote corners of the world do not simply disappear. As the world turns its eyes back to the high north, the ghosts of the abandoned bases linger. The American flowers still bloom in the tundra, and a toxic city still sleeps beneath the ice. The central question now is whether the lessons from this complex history have been learned. As a new chapter of engagement with Greenland begins, it carries the weight, the waste, and the warnings of the past. The ice remembers,